What would you do if you had to choose between your own safety and saving your entire people from annihilation? Imagine being a young woman thrust into a royal palace, hidden behind a false identity, married to one of the most powerful kings in history, and then discovering that a decree has been signed to exterminate every member of your race. Would you risk everything, including your own life, to speak up? Or would you remain silent, hoping somehow to escape the coming genocide? This isn't the plot of a Hollywood thriller. This is the true story of a Jewish orphan girl named Hadassah, who became Queen Esther of Persia, and whose courage changed the course of history for an entire nation. Her story, preserved in the biblical book that bears her name, is one of divine providence, extraordinary bravery, and the power of standing up for what's right, when the stakes couldn't be higher. Let's journey back over 2,400 years to the ancient Persian Empire, and discover how one woman's faith and courage literally saved her people from destruction. Our story begins in Susa, the winter capital of the mighty Persian Empire, during the reign of King Xerxes I, also known as Ahasuerus, who ruled from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. This was approximately 483 BC, and Persia was the superpower of the ancient world. The Book of Esther opens with an extravagant display of wealth and power. King Xerxes threw a lavish banquet lasting 180 days for all his nobles and officials, showcasing the splendor of his kingdom. This was followed by a 7-day feast for all the people in the citadel of Susa, from the greatest to the least. The Bible describes gardens with white and blue linen curtains, marble pillars, gold and silver couches, and wine flowing freely in golden goblets. On the 7th day of feasting, when King Xerxes was merry with wine, he commanded his 7 eunuchs to bring Queen Vashti before him wearing her royal crown, so he could display her beauty to the people and nobles. But Queen Vashti refused to come. Her refusal enraged the king, and after consulting with his advisors who feared that Vashti's disobedience would cause all women throughout the empire to despise their husbands, the king issued a decree. Vashti would never again enter his presence, and her royal position would be given to someone better than she. Meanwhile, in the citadel of Susa lived a Jewish man named Mordecai from the tribe of Benjamin, whose family had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had adopted as his own daughter when her father and mother died. Hadassah, also known by her Persian name Esther, was lovely in form and features. A young woman of exceptional beauty. When the king's edict went out to gather beautiful young virgins from across the empire to find a new queen, Esther was among those taken to the palace. Under the care of Hegai, the king's eunuch in charge of the harem, she underwent 12 months of beauty treatments, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics, as was customary for the women. But Esther had a secret. Following Mordecai's instructions, she had not revealed her nationality or family background. In a foreign court where Jews were a minority people living in exile, this concealment would prove crucial to God's plan. Esther 2 verses 15 to 17 tells us, when the turn came for Esther to go to the king, she asked for nothing other than what Hegai, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the harem, suggested. And Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. Now the king was attracted to Esther more than to any of the other women, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head, and made her queen instead of Vashti. Esther became queen, yet she remained obedient to Mordecai's guidance, still keeping her Jewish identity hidden. Every day, Mordecai would walk back and forth near the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was and what was happening to her. During this time, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, he discovered a conspiracy. 2 of the king's officers, who guarded the doorway, became angry and plotted to assassinate King Xerxes. Mordecai uncovered the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. The report was investigated, found to be true, and the 2 officials were hanged on a gallows. All this was recorded in the book of the annals in the presence of the king. A detail that would become significant later. After these events, King Xerxes elevated Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, to the highest position among all the nobles. All the royal officials at the king's gate would kneel down and pay honor to Haman, as the king had commanded. But Mordecai refused to kneel or pay him honor. When Haman noticed that Mordecai would not kneel or pay him honor, he was furious. Yet having learned that Mordecai was a Jew, Haman scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, he looked for a way to destroy all of Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. Haman cast the lot, to select a day for carrying out his evil plan. Then he approached King Xerxes with a carefully crafted deception. There is a certain people dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of all other people, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for the royal treasury. Esther 3 verses 8-9. The king, not even asking which people Haman was referring to, gave Haman his signet ring and told him to do with the people as he pleased. Dispatches were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with the order to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews. Young and old, women and children, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was bewildered. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. Jews throughout the provinces were in great mourning, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. When Esther's eunuchs and female attendants told her about Mordecai's behavior, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther sent Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend her, to find out what was troubling Mordecai. Mordecai told him everything and gave him a copy of the edict for Esther to see, with instructions to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. But Esther sent back this message. All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court, without being summoned, the king has but one law: that they be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. Esther 4 verse 11. Esther's response reveals her dilemma. She was queen, yes, but even queens could be executed for approaching the king uninvited. She had not been summoned for a month. Perhaps the king's affections had already wandered. To go to him now could mean death. Mordecai sent back this reply, containing some of the most powerful words in scripture. Do not think that because you are in the king's house you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? Esther 4 verses 13-14. These words pierced Esther's heart. Mordecai was telling her that her position was no accident, that perhaps God had orchestrated everything, from her beauty to her selection as queen, for this exact moment in history. She had been placed in the palace for such a time as this. Esther's response demonstrated remarkable courage. Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. Esther 4 verse 16. For 3 days, Esther and her people fasted. Then, on the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace, in front of the king's hall. When the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased and held out to her the gold scepter. Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. "What is it, Queen Esther?" the king asked. "What is your request?" "Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given you." Esther 5 verse 3. But Esther didn't immediately reveal her request. Instead, she invited the king and Haman to a banquet she had prepared. At the banquet, when the king again asked what her petition was, Esther invited them to another banquet the following day, saying she would then answer the king's question. Haman left that day in high spirits, honored to be the only noble invited to the queen's private banquet. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and noticed that Mordecai neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage. Still, he restrained himself and went home, where he boasted to his friends and wife about his vast wealth, his many sons, and how the queen had invited no one but him to accompany the king to the banquet. "But all this gives me no satisfaction," Haman admitted, "as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate." Esther 5 verse 13. His wife and friends suggested he have a gallows built, 75 feet high, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Delighted with this suggestion, Haman had the gallows built. That night, the king could not sleep. So he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was read that Mordecai had exposed the plot to assassinate the king, and the king asked, "What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this?" "Nothing has been done for him," his attendants answered. Just then, Haman entered the outer court to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows he had prepared. The king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor. Haman, thinking the king was referring to him, suggested an elaborate honor. That the man be dressed in the king's royal robe and led on the king's horse through the city streets, with someone proclaiming before him, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." "Go at once," the king commanded Haman. "Get the robe and the horse and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew." Esther 6 verse 10. Haman had to honor the very man he hated, leading Mordecai through the streets while proclaiming his honor. Afterward, Haman rushed home, mourning with his head covered. His wife and advisers prophetically told him, "Since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him, you will surely come to ruin." Esther 6 verse 13. At Esther's second banquet, the king again asked, "Queen Esther, what is your petition?" "It will be given you." "What is your request?" "Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted." Esther 7 verse 2. Then Esther revealed everything. "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life, this is my petition. And spare my people, this is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king." Esther 7 verses 3 to 4. King Xerxes demanded, "Who is he? Where is he, the man who has dared to do such a thing?" Esther said, "An adversary and enemy. This vile Haman." Esther 7 verse 6. The king was furious. He went out into the palace garden in his anger. Haman, realizing the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. But when the king returned from the palace garden, Haman had fallen on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, "Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" One of the eunuchs attending the king said, "A gallows 75 feet high stands by Haman's house. He had it set up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king." The king said, "Hang him on it." So they hanged Haman on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Victory and deliverance. That same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman. Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai. But the Jews were still in danger. The edict to destroy them had been written with the king's signet ring, and could not be revoked according to Persian law. So Esther again approached the king, falling at his feet and weeping. She begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman. The king extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she stood before him. She asked him to issue an order overriding Haman's dispatches. King Xerxes told Esther and Mordecai to write another decree in the king's name on behalf of the Jews as seemed best to them, and to seal it with the king's signet ring. The new decree granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill and annihilate any armed force that might attack them, and to plunder the property of their enemies. This was to take place on the same day Haman had selected for their destruction, the 13th day of the 12th month. Mounted on the royal horses, the couriers went out, spurred on by the king's command, and the edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. Mordecai left the king's presence wearing royal garments of blue and white, a large crown of gold and a purple robe of fine linen. And the city of Susa held a joyous celebration. For the Jews it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor. Esther 8 verses 15 to 16. On the appointed day, the Jews assembled in their cities to attack those seeking their destruction. No one could stand against them, because the people of all the other nationalities were afraid of them. The Jews struck down all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them. In Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men, including the 10 sons of Haman. When the king asked Esther what else she wanted, she requested that the Jews in Susa be allowed to carry out the edict one more day, and that the bodies of Haman's sons be hanged on the gallows. This was done. Mordecai recorded these events and sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Xerxes, establishing that they should celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, as the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month when their sorrow was turned into joy and their mourning into a day of celebration. They were to observe these days as days of feasting and joy and giving presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. These days were called Purim, from the word per lot, because Haman had cast the pur to determine the day for the Jews' destruction, but his evil scheme had come back on his own head. Mordecai was promoted to second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews, and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews, because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. Esther 10 verse 3. The story of Esther resonates across millennia, because it speaks to timeless truths about courage, faith, and divine providence. Though God's name is never explicitly mentioned in the book of Esther, his presence is evident on every page, in the coincidences that weren't coincidental, in the sleepless night that led to Mordecai's honor, in the timing that saved a nation. Esther teaches us that God places people in positions for such a time as this. Your circumstances, your opportunities, your platform, whatever it may be, may have been given to you for a divine purpose you don't yet fully understand. When the moment comes, when you're called to stand up for what's right, will you have the courage to say, "If I perish, I perish"? We learn that silence in the face of injustice is not safety, it's complicity. Mordecai warned Esther that even in the palace, she wouldn't escape the consequences of Haman's evil decree. Sometimes our greatest safety comes not from hiding who we are or staying silent, but from courageously standing up and speaking out. The story also reminds us that pride comes before a fall. Haman's arrogance and hatred led directly to his destruction. The gallows he built for Mordecai became his own execution site. As Proverbs 26 verse 27 says, "Whoever digs a pit will fall into it. If someone rolls a stone, it will roll back on them." We see the power of community and fasting. Esther didn't face her trial alone. She asked her people to fast with her for 3 days. There is strength in unity, in praying together, in supporting one another through difficult times. Perhaps most powerfully, Esther's story demonstrates that God can take the evil intentions of others and turn them for good. What Haman meant for destruction became the very means of the Jews' deliverance and triumph. Romans 8:28 promises, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." Maybe you're watching this today and feeling small, insignificant, or powerless. Perhaps you're facing a situation where speaking up seems dangerous, where staying silent seems safer, where the odds seem impossible. Let Esther's story speak to your heart. You are not where you are by accident. The very thing that seems like a challenge. Your background, your position, your unique circumstances, may be exactly what God wants to use to bring about His purposes. For such a time as this. These 6 words changed history when Mordecai spoke them to Esther, and they can change your life today. You have been placed where you are, with the gifts you have, with the opportunities before you, for such a time as this. Yes, stepping forward requires courage. Yes, there are risks. But as Esther discovered, the greater risk is often in remaining silent. When you align yourself with God's purposes and stand up for what's right, you become part of a story much bigger than yourself. Maybe you're that voice that needs to speak up in your workplace when injustice is happening. Maybe you're the person positioned to help someone who can't help themselves. Maybe you've been given resources, influence, or opportunities that aren't just for your own benefit, but to be a blessing to others. Esther 4 verse 14 reminds us that if we remain silent, deliverance will come from another place. God's purposes will be accomplished. But what an honor it is to be the instrument He uses. What a privilege to say, "Here I am, Lord. Use me." Don't let fear paralyze you. Don't let comfort silence you. Don't let the approval of others matter more than obedience to God. Remember Esther's words, "If I perish, I perish." When you surrender the outcome to God and trust Him with your life, you're free to be courageous in ways you never imagined possible. Your such a time as this moment may be today. It may be tomorrow. It may be years from now. But when it comes, remember the Jewish orphan girl who became a queen and saved a nation. Remember that God's providence is always at work, even when you can't see it. Remember that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite the fear. As Philippians 4 verse 13 declares, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." Your story is still being written. God is positioning you even now for the purposes He has planned. Trust Him. Be courageous. Stand firm. And when your moment comes, step forward knowing that the God who was with Esther is with you. Thank you so much for watching. If this story encouraged you today, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, you were born for such a time as this. God bless you.